We're all set with the live stream.
Great, thank you. And Madam Deputy Clerk, since one of the delegation presenters is not here, is it possible that we can proceed with, there we go. Now we've got a compliment. Okay, excellent. Well, it is now 3 o'clock. Then I would like to call to order the meeting of the Long-Term Care Redevelopment Planning Task Force of June 15th. And first of all, I would like to identify if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing and hearing none, then we can proceed to the delegations. And with us today, we have Mr. Rodriguez and Ms. Wilson to present. We did have the materials that were circulated to us in advance in the revised edition, so I'll encourage everybody to turn to that in their documents, or are we going to be sharing a screen as well?
Yeah, we will be sharing a screen.
Okay, perfect. Well, in that case, then I would like to hand the floor over to you. If you would like to start that, I'll keep track of when there are hands going up, virtual hands going up, and I may need to interrupt you if I see a collection that may like to ask questions along the way.
Okay, great. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here briefly, and we can go ahead and get started. Could you just let me know if you can see this properly as a full screen?
Yes,
Okay.
It is a full screen. Thank
Excellent. You. So pleased to be here this afternoon and to provide an update to the task force. Today, it's going to be mostly talking about work plan, what we're forecasting in terms of schedule and next steps. We do have an upcoming meeting that's booked for in July where we'll be able to report more quantitatively and the results of the value engineering in terms of revised Class B. So that will be forthcoming. As part of our presentation today, I'll provide an update in terms of schedule and work plan. And we also have Nancy Wilson from Kasian Architecture, who will be sharing some updates in terms of, from a site plan perspective, what are the implications or outcomes of the value engineering initiatives, and to answer any questions that members of the task force may have. So in terms of schedule, I want to go over the overall impact in terms of the costing we received and presented at the end of March, and the current focus, which has been, excuse me, the value engineering activities. The impact of this phase has been about what we're estimating to be 2.5 to 3 months on the overall schedule. And that's what you see in the red box reflected under the design activities. What this work plan demonstrates is positive results following the value engineering initiatives, and then resuming with where we left off in terms of submitting revised technical plans to the Ministry of Long-Term Care and working through our final and last technical submission, which is the working drawing. I will note that given the changes that have happened to the floor plan, we would likely need to resubmit our first technical submission, which is the preliminary plans. However, we have tried to maintain as close as possible the spaces and adjacencies in the long-term care component of what was the campus of care. So we believe with a few meetings and explicitly showing where the changes were in removing the assisted living and Village Square, that we could certainly expedite that review and not have any holdups that would trigger some rework. In terms of the tendering, that would be pushed out to later on this year, so late October, early November, and the intent would be to be in a position to award a contract before the Christmas break. So while construction wouldn't physically start on the main site and long-term care home, what it would allow the successful general contractor to do is to start ordering equipment that has long lead times and start working through the shop drawing review and approval process. The dashed line at the end of 2023, this corresponds to the early works. And the objective over here would be to be in a position end of July or early August to tender those early works. So these are works that have to take place in terms of preliminary site grading, preliminary construction of the access road or the extension of South and Rock Street. And we see this as an advantage to, one, reduce the overall risk of lumping this up with the general contractor's contract and adding on to the overall schedule. But the second piece is, by tendering it early, it would give us an objective number to compare to our cost estimate. And if there are any savings or adjustments that are achieved, then we have the opportunity to make some changes to the overall plans before going out to tender for the long-term care component. So that's what's reflected in these dashed lines here. In terms of our overall impact to our schedule, what you would have previously seen as a first resident date in June, this has been pushed to September 2026. And the biggest impact over here is driven by not getting a shovel in the ground before the winter conditions this year. So for the most part, the long-term care redevelopment would start during spring conditions next year, with the exception of the early works that are proposed to advance this year. So we have been able to save a little bit from a net impact standpoint, looking at a smaller scope. There's no longer construction of the village square and the assisted living. However, we are losing out on having a shovel in the ground by end of August, which was the prior objective with the ministry's timeline and additional funding. So in summary, this is what we're forecasting right now, again, based on positive results of the value engineering activities that we expect to present to the group here in early July. In terms of key decisions and what's forthcoming, so I mentioned the results of the value engineering, activities that will be presented in July 6th. And then following this, there would be the review and approval of pre-qualification for general contractors and approval of a capital work borrowing bylaw that we estimate needs to be complete before the end of September, roughly a month before the tender would go out for the general contractors. And then review and approval of tender results and having a recommendation to award a package that would go to the Ministry of Long-Term Care immediately before the Christmas holidays in December. So just in terms of structuring next updates with the task force and council, these are the minimum key decision points or upcoming activities where we would want to be able to report progress. We'd also be working with continue working with Grey County staff and West Grey as necessary, based on the early works and any reviews and approvals as we work through site plan application approval and the building permit process. So I'd like to just pause at this point to see if there's any questions or comments in relation to the work plan. There'll be a little bit more shared in terms of, as I mentioned, Nancy will go over the site, revised site plan and what some of the outcomes have been. But if there are any questions in relation to schedule, I'd just like to pause and answer them now before we move forward to the second portion of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I'll put it out there then. If there are any members of the task force that would like to raise their virtual hand if they have a question, or there may be a preference to digest the whole presentation first and then go into discussion. Okay, not seeing any hands raised, so I think we should probably proceed then and get to the end of the presentation, and then we can circle back to questions for you.
Okay, thank you. Nancy, I'll hand over to you just to share your slides and to provide an overview to the task force, please.
Thank you. One moment here. Okay.
Through you, Madam
Okay.
Chair. Apologies, Nancy. I think it's displaying your other monitor if you have to.
Yes, sorry about that. I did test this prior. Let me try one more time. This is supposed to show. So here, there we go. Can you see the whole presentation?
Yes, Nancy. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Thanks very much. So thank you, Madam Chair, and the task force for having us here today. So I'm Nancy Wilson. I am the project architect for the Rockwood Terrace long-term care home. So the team behind the thinking and ideas of this presentation include a full array of architects and engineers. And for the value engineering and early works efforts in particular, Kasian Architecture, Ted Handy and Associates, Quasar Building Systems Engineers, and EXP Civil Engineers. So the value engineering process began with the design team's suggestion to reduce the cost of the project while maintaining the key project drivers that we set with Grey County at the very beginning, which are energy and climate resilience, connectivity, operations, and integrated community. The biggest outward difference to the design resulting from the value engineering exercise is the site plan, which netted some savings in the site development. So this is the site plan as it was in October 2022, just as we were preparing for the site plan application. And you're likely familiar with the essential elements. So we have the, here's my laser pointer here. This is the long-term care building with its driveway and short-term and barrier-free parking on Rock Street. This was the Village Square on South Street. We had staff and Village Square parking here on the west with accessible parking distributed throughout. This area here was earmarked for independent living, and there was a stormwater pond in this location here. So the story of the site development also continued off-site a bit. So this is Rock Street here, and on the other side of Rock Street, there was a large stormwater pond planned to deal with stormwater running across the eastern half of the site and Rock Street itself. And the situation couldn't exist in isolation, so it actually triggered being sized for a capacity that would cover the surrounding 15 hectares. Okay. So with the value engineering exercise, the team undertook a redesign of the site plan focused on reducing the site development impact. In other words, leaving as much as is as possible, particularly at the north boundary where there's a large berm. So moving anything southward essentially would reduce the excavation costs. So the design team had optimized the building footprint initially and the parking areas relative to the berm. However, we saw a new opportunity having removed the Village Square here at the south. We wondered if Grey County had other plans for the future independent living. So we tested what would happen if we revisited the stormwater management plan if the independent living wasn't going to be built. So this is the new site plan. So we moved the building southward. We moved the parking area that was previously here over to the southwest to make space for a new stormwater pond and to eliminate the one that was on the other side of Rock Street. We rebalanced the parking areas so that we have staff parking here to the west and we have visitor parking at the east. We moved the community plaza, which was previously in this location here, to the south to enliven and soften that elevation from the street. And it will do double duty as community plaza and a staff respite area. And the resident outdoor amenity spaces, walking trail, generator location, and receiving and garbage pickup bays remain more or less the same. So these are the bays here. There's a trail back here, and then our resident area, outdoor areas are here and here. So overall, through the VE exercise, we were very pleased that we could retain all of Grey County's original site plan drivers that you might recall from our first meeting. So these are pragmatic items that speak to operationally efficient and sustainable development. And despite the loss of the assisted living in Village Square, we were able to keep Grey County's original mandate of community connectivity in the site plan. So community connectivity was about the site design's response to research that shows that elders in long-term care homes fare better when they feel like they're connected and part of the community. So we've built this concept into the site design throughout informal pathways and sidewalks to neighboring properties, transitional spaces on the perimeter, indoor or outdoor, to be used by the community and all of the residents, planning for ecology education for school and daycare, as well as an amenity for the residents, and sheltered scooter parking, including power receptacles. And that is the end of my show.
Okay, thank you. And just before I go to members of the task force with questions, I'll just look to CAO Wingrove or any of the other staff that are here if you'd like to speak to those changes. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Chair Mastrosovs, and to everyone on the task force. From a staff perspective, I think we're really, really pleased with the work that our consultants have undertaken for us. I think we'll see really positive impacts in the change, just because, in my opinion, the building itself is now cited in such a way as to be much more aligned with the topography of the site. Being able to bring the building forward really does eliminate an awful lot of earthworks, etc., that were quite expensive. And I think they've been able to do this, but also give us a really good product. There are some other details about things that we had talked about earlier, as far as having to deal with soil at the very back of the property where it adjoins the existing Rockwood Terrace. We don't have to do that anymore. We're working really collaboratively with West Gray, as you're going to hear from Randy in a few minutes on those early works, but working with the curling club that's adjacent and some of that. And it just feels really good that some of the conversations and negotiations we've been able to do. So I'm really grateful to the Kezian team for all of their thoughts and great work in this. So thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then with regards to the alternative for the assisted living, so by taking that out, what's the answer? How do we still provide transition, and choices for people along their long-term care needs?
Right. And that's certainly, as a, when we think about what's happening in the whole health sector and the province's plan for more community-based health that they released in February of this year, I think there's an awful lot of work that's kind of in progress, if you will, around how that can work better. You're going to hear from Anne-Marie shortly as well, who did have some good conversations with Alan Avis Architects around what the potential for the existing long-term care home is. And I'm really, really pleased that there's some potential there that hadn't been brought forward in the past. So I think there's some good stuff there as well. We haven't spent very much time at all ever at this table talking about it, but the county we own a lot of property on the other side of Rock Street. And I think, at when it's appropriate, when we get a little further along in this process, I think we can have some good conversations too about how we want to use that property. What of the county's goals do we want to serve by having that asset?
Okay, thank you for that then. So I'll then put it out to members of the task force if they have questions or comments. Okay, well, detailed presentations lead to fewer questions. Okay, I see a hand going up, I think with Councillor Gray. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Didn't think I'd ask the first question, but I am going to ask to Nancy. Recently, a 160-bed home was completed by Southbridge here in Owen Sound. And it has been stated to me that worst case scenario, worst cost escalations from when it was completed, it could have topped out at $50 million in total construction costs. I'm just wondering, is there, or there could be some who could provide suggestion that the courtyard on a long-term basis could be problematic or have additional costs in terms of accessing. Is there comment that you can provide in terms of just keeping the courtyard incorporated in the design, or any other particular significant cost drivers at this point? I know July 6th is coming up and perhaps that's the more opportune time. I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to have you comment if you're able.
So thank you. So I think it's best to leave any conversation about cost until the July 6th, but I can comment on providing outdoor space. So it is a requirement of the Ministry of Long-Term Care to provide outdoor space for the residents. And what we're looking at in the future, the latest stat I heard is that approximately 60% of people living in long-term care will have dementia, in which case having an enclosed courtyard or enclosed landscape area is particularly important. And then also for the security of the building, you want all of your visitors to be coming in through one area. So for quality of life and also health and wellness, which ultimately reduce operational costs when people are more well. We want people to have good access to nature and daylight and outside air. So I think it's providing good outdoor space for people is really, really important. Often in long-term care, these homes and the outdoor spaces provided, these are people's world. So it's extremely important and supported by the latest best practices.
Okay, and could I just ask a point of clarification to Councillor Gregg? Are you referring specifically to the indoor, the inside square courtyard as opposed to the one that's called Secure West courtyard? There's Central and West.
It was, and I appreciate that that information from Nancy and the long-term considerations there. Just didn't. I certainly just wanted it to be commented to as to whether that should be left in an open nature or enclosed. So that response is good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Mr. Rodriguez, who has something to add.
Yeah, thank you very much. So notwithstanding the comments that Nancy mentioned, which I fully agree with, the other consideration with the site was that the further north we go, it becomes very expensive or cost prohibitive due to the site conditions and constraints. So there, as Nancy mentioned, moving the building further south generated some savings in terms of scope of works from an earthworks perspective. So enclosing that courtyard versus opening it was also a strategy from a cost perspective that we had looked at with the previous iteration as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions from members of the committee or the task force? Okay, welcome Warden Milne. All right, so
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for being late.
No problem. We're just glad that you can juggle all the events at once. So that's great. So thank you very much. So with that, then, if there are no further questions, we do have a motion. Oh, actually, no, that's coming up. Madam Deputy Clerk, I'm used to doing a motion to receive deputations. Did you want one? Do you?
There isn't one on the agenda, but you're more than welcome to pose one.
Okay. Well, Is there a member of the task force that would like to put forth a motion to receive this presentation? Okay, thank you. Councillor McQueen has moved and Councillor Hutchinson has seconded. Any discussion on that motion to receive? All right, then I'll ask for the vote. All in favor? Okay, thank you very much. And Madam Deputy Clerk, that is carried. Okay, go back to. Excellent. Well, thank you very much to both of our presenters today. And yes, of course, we will carry on with the nature of the discussion that we've had, but that is a very important update to have reviewed before we head on to our reports. So thank you to both of you for that. That allows us to go to reports, and we do have several. So the first one is report number A4A, which is CSR RP 1323. It's the assessment of the repurposing of Rockwood Terrace. And could I have a motion on the floor? So, or Mr. Schertzer, did you want to make a presentation first, or shall I get a motion on the floor to receive?
This is the first one. Sorry, Anne-Marie's.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to. Yes, go ahead.
I apologize for the interruption. There is a motion attached to this report that it be received for information, and if you wouldn't mind having it put on the floor before we proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's certainly my preference, and I tried to kind of bring that over to my municipality as well. So thank you. So with that, I would like to look for a motion that report CSR RP 1323 regarding the assessment of repurposing Rockwood Terrace be received for information. May I please have a mover? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Mackey and seconded by Warden Milne. And now we're open for discussion. So with that, then I would like to turn it over to Ms. Shaw to introduce this report.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, committee members. We hired Alan Avis Architects to have a look at Rockwood Terrace for a feasibility, just a brief feasibility study to look at repurposing the building, whether or not we could look at some affordable and market units, how many units might be available, and what a Class D cost of the units would be. We also wanted to get their thoughts on repurposing versus a tearing down and starting over again. So they did attend the building in May, I believe it was. They thought, in their opinion, that the structure of the building would require minimal repairs, but the majority of the existing mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing, sprinkler systems, were at the end of their life expectancy or would not be well suited to the potential apartment rent retrofit, and that these systems would need to be replaced as part of the retrofit project. There were a few other items that they did identify to fire alarm system, all the windows and doors, elevators, and there were issues with the existing storm line would all need to be repaired or replaced. And there may be some site changes that would have to be made in order to increase the amount of parking that would be required when you're switching to an apartment building. They did provide us with a Class D estimate and some drawings in a 54 unit affordable building. The way that the hallways and the way that the building is currently structured, they were able to, I believe it's 4 or 5 different sizes of units, right from a bachelor at 350 square feet up to like a 2-bedroom of 800 square feet. The cost for this retrofit would be around $19 million. That is a Class D estimate. So they did recommend, if we were to move forward, that more analysis would be required with structural, civil, mechanical, and electrical engineering, and also a study of architectural impacts. Some of the considerations that they looked at for a repurpose of the building is the benefit of the decrease of the overall carbon footprint of the project, and the fact that it obviously expedites the construction schedule when you're not starting from new. They felt that the increase in rising prices for abatement and demolition are significant, and if we were to our building, that would have an additional cost, and also the cost of building right now. The steel, the has also increased, and thought that it would be more significant, it would be a decrease. It would be a savings of about 30% if it was the retrofit versus a new build. And I am happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay, thank you. So I'll put it out there, then it is on the floor for discussion. I'll put it out there to members of the task force if they have questions, and we'll start with Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for simple math, I took the 19,140,000, divide it by 54, comes out to a cost of 354,450 roughly. In today's day and cost of building housing and units, it seems pretty reasonable. In a sense of $19 million sort of scares the bejeebers out of you. But if you look at the number of units that you're basically, if the structure is solid, as they sort of indicate it, you're basing that forward for probably 25 to 35 years before. However, I don't know, I'm not the expert on that either, but I just did the simple math on that. So for the cost of a unit of 354,000, and maybe there's more discussion on those units, as if there's some bachelor and some mix of, so they're not going to be all the same price per unit, but just in simple math to create housing, you know, that does seem in that sense reasonable in today's market. So I just throw that out there. $19 million is a lot of money.
Yes, and thank you. I think we probably all did that simple math because that was certainly the numbers that I came up with as well. But the one question then that I did have is that the estimated cost square foot budget then is 327, and we are hearing that that's low these days. So that is, is that my question then to add on to Councillor McQueen's comment is that because we would be saving by being able to use the structure itself as opposed to ground up?
That is true. The architects, Alan Avis Architects, did state that it would be about a 30 to 40% savings by using the structure. We have another nonprofit that's interested in building, and right now they're around 410,000 from starting from the ground up. So it sort of goes with what we've been seeing recently too with another project.
Okay, thank you. And are there other questions from members of the task force? Yes, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks very much, Anne Marie, for this report. It's nice to see that a building from 1984 does not necessarily need to be tore down, because I certainly, question that right from the get-go. So I'm glad to see that there's value in it. Would this be affordable housing, or I'm just wondering about the business case. What sort of revenue or rent would you expect to receive from 54 units?
Okay, and I can see CAO Wingrove has put her hand up for that.
And also Anne Marie can speak to what might be available from an affordable perspective. I think if folks are interested, what the next step with this would be to undertake kind of a deeper dive into what the opportunities were for in partnership or working with the private sector, understanding whether or not having the county undertake a project like this is the most appropriate thing, or whether or not there are other options. And so I think that's what we would want to do. And we do have some lead time, right? Because as you heard from Andrew, the building will continue to be used in its current form until sometime in later on in 2026. So we do have a bit of time to try and think about what programs might be available to assist us with this, and who, if there's others that might want to work with us or operate it in the future. I don't know, Anne Marie, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes, certainly we would have to do a cost analysis on what would make sense for rents, especially if we're looking at, would we be looking at a debenture or a loan? There's lots of different scenarios that we would need to play out, and along with, is this a county build, or is it a nonprofit build or a private sector build? But certainly this is the first step in pointing us in the right direction, that it does make sense for some sort of repurposing of the building.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of the task force? Okay, I don't see any other fresh hands, so we'll go back to Councillor McQueen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I wasn't sure if you're looking at me or not. Yeah, I think it's a good report that, even if we were to divest ourselves in this building completely and the private sector was to purchase it and put the investment in it, I think that still shows that it does have good bones. I know I was just at a local hardware store a week ago, and the price of aspenite is under $20. Not saying aspenite is used in this building, but as a benchmark, it was up over 45 a few years back. So I see some material starting to taper off and coming back down to a little bit more of a reality check and drywall and stuff like that. So, we've sort of gone through a bit of a time, but I think as Councillor Mackey has said, I've always had the same opinion that there's some good bones here that could be, but sometimes there may be a little bit of a higher standard because of a municipal or a county building being owned by us, that if it was private sector, maybe there's other costings that maybe are different than ours. And I'm not suggesting that to be as an absolute, but I think that I think it does give the county a number of different options, and certainly having that building repurposed, I think, is the ultimate goal in the sense of providing some source of housing for, as we know, we have a shortage of. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. And back over to Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I guess either to Anne Marie or to Kim. So what further work can we have done on this building to make it saleable? You know, if that's the wish of county council to divest ourselves of this property, how can we make sure we're getting the most value for it? So what other work can we do? You know, if we wanted to list, I mean, I think this is a really good start. If we're able to demonstrate that this is 30 to 40% cheaper, I think there would be, you know, people in the private sector that would certainly be willing to have a look at that. I'm not presuming that's the way county council wants to go, but I'm just wondering what other work that we can actually do to be able to put it on the market if that's what we wanted to do. I recognize this is well up the road, that we need a new build before that ever happens, but you know, a lot of these projects do take a number of years, so I'd just like to ready ourselves for whatever may happen. Certainly, we recognize there's been old hospitals that have been reconverted into apartments, so the willingness is out there for some parties. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I did see CEO Wingrove look like she was getting ready to provide some comments.
Well, one thought, and I'm sure again that Randy or Anne Marie might have others, but as you're going to hear from Randy shortly about the early works, and some of those early works will require some significant construction on Rock Street. Right now, people park on Rock Street. And so one of the things that we're suggesting is that on the adjacent property on the other side of the existing Rockwood Terrace, that there's some work done to prepare the county's property to accept that parking. And so getting the parking organized, I think certainly is necessary during the construction, but ensuring that there's adequate parking on the site for any future residential uses is probably something that would be valuable, and that is our intent.
Okay, thank you. And any other comments from any other of the staff members? Yes, go ahead, Michelle.
Sure, I agree with that. Also, the stormwater, we could possibly look at that. That is a concern right now anyways, so something that we could look into. And whether there was any zoning, any planning, anything we would need to do in order to make it residential is certainly something else that we could look in order to prepare it for sale.
Okay, thank you. And over to Mr. Schertzer.
Yeah, thank you. And just further to Kim and Anne-Marie's comments, with respect to the zoning, I know the municipality of West Grey is going through, or will be going through, a zoning bylaw update. So that's something that we could work with them on in terms of flagging to at least identify, even if this, you know, depending on the options that are pursued with particular this property, getting it into the right zone, which makes the most sense, right? So whether it's residential, whether it's a mixed use zone to provide, again, more flexibility, I think that's where something that we can work with West Grey staff to pursue further.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, Councillor McQueen, I don't see others putting their hands up, so go ahead.
Well, and with Councillor Hutchison on this committee, I think it's a good thing for him to take back. He's hearing it here, and it's right in his neck of the woods. So I think that you know, he's, you know, can convey that as well, and to the need, I'm sure, that's in Durham itself. So
thank you. And yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Lots of notes going on there, Councillor McLean. That's what I'm doing now as a note taker to take back to council. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. I did have a question too about the report, about how far deep in this preliminary, you know, scope of comparison did deconstruction come into the consideration when comparing cost about demolition. We had a lot of success over where we've actually brought something back down to ground. So we've actually not tried to maintain the outer shell of a building. And I was just curious about that because we were able to divert, for one thing, to make sure that we less went to landfill, but be able to salvage and actually make some revenue generation on making sure that the materials that came out of it, even the steel, for example. So in this kind of concept, was that considered in terms of the comparison to the full demolition, but also looking to go in the building and pull out what can't be used? I can anticipate that the mechanical equipment is as end of life, but in terms of the raw materials, you know, is there steel? Would there be steel coming out of it, or is that all staying because it's all the structure is staying?
I don't really know the entire answer to that, but I can say that I think because the structure is staying, there would be a lot of those materials. There's also hazardous materials in the building. So I think that the removal of the hazardous materials was actually what was, they were saying would be the majority of the cost. Maybe not the majority, but a significant amount of cost. But definitely, you know, as we move further in the process, if we were looking at you know, the demolition of the indoor part of it. The only comment that they did make to me in an email was that they were surprised when they reached out for a quote for the removal of the cost of it.
Right.
It was higher than what they've seen in the past.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, oh yes, Councillor Gray, go ahead.
Quick question through you, Chair, for Anne Marie. Did the architect give consideration to the possibility or potential of putting another floor on some of that property? Makes it more viable.
They did not, but that is again something that you could look at when you're looking at the actual doing an architectural overview of the site. We just asked for a brief feasibility study, and so definitely that'd be something for a next step.
Right, especially if the roof already needs renewal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and Councillor McQueen?
Right, just in the sense of the renewal of that building, I would assume that it would be with the new heating system and cooling system would be, you know, more into a green mode in the sense of heat pumps and that type of thing. So you're sort of bringing yourself forward to a modernizing the carbon footprint in the sense of, I know it said about with the 30 to 40% less carbon footprint because you're repurposing a building, but also like every building in our own homes, we're being looked upon as heat pumps and, you know, what that's double purposing for air conditioning and stuff, and modernizing our demands on our or to be more non-carbon. So I think that's something that there may be a possibility if it is a municipal building. Maybe there's some funding out there, some green funding, you don't know, like in a sense of modernizing an existing building, repurposing a building, but making it less of a carbon, having less of a carbon footprint. So I think that's something that, you know, I think you know, why wouldn't we go after FCM, or why wouldn't we go after some funding on that part? And I think that's something we could keep in the back of our mind, or maybe even start to source out now, you know, in that sense, and see if we can see what's out there and that type of thing. Let's be proactive in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from task force members? Okay, so I do not see any further hands. So, and we do have the motion on the floor to receive this. So then if that is the case, if there's no further discussion, then I would like to call the vote. All those in favor of the motion that's on the floor to receive? Thank you. And that motion is carried, Madam Deputy Clerk. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Shaw, and to the others that have offered us some insight into this look. That allows us to move on to the next report. I'll just call my agenda back up here. Having to move things around on my desk due to a cat. Okay, so we're now able to move on to the next one, which is the early grading road and servicing work. So that is Mr. Schertzer's court here. So we're at item 4B, which is CAORRP 08223, the Rockwood Terrace redevelopment early grading road and servicing works. So there is actually a three-part motion recommended here in the agenda, that the report regarding the early road and servicing works of Rockwood Terrace redevelopment project be received, and that staff be authorized to issue the tender for early grading, road and servicing works to support the Rockwood Terrace redevelopment project, and that the warden and clerk be authorized to sign the necessary agreements with the municipality of West Gray and adjacent landowners that are required to implement the early works. May I ask for a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Hutchinson. Seconded by Councillor Mackey. Thank you. Okay, it's now on the floor for discussion. So with that, then I'll turn it over to Mr. Schertzer.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm just going to share my screen. Just have a quick slide deck to go through here. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put on full screen mode over here. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Chair Matrosovs and the task force. So the purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the proposed early road and servicing works associated with the future Rockwood Terrace redevelopment, and potentially consider other works that would support future development adjacent to the Rockwood Terrace lands as well. I think Andrew provided a good segue in terms of this, and he mentioned this during his presentation about some of the considerations around the early works and why we're considering the early works. As a task force is aware, the new Rockwood Terrace is being located just south of the existing Rockwood Terrace lands and right adjacent to the Durham Curling Club. The site is a greenfield, requires grading, extensions of both Rock and South Streets, and various servicing works. Much of this work can be completed prior to the construction of the building itself through a separate tender process. And this will help to prepare the site for construction and also provide the access roads that will be used during the construction phase for the overall project. While the road is being constructed, it's prudent to also advance some of the water, wastewater, and stormwater management works that will be placed under the road in order to avoid digging up that road and redoing it later on. These works would eventually require environmental compliance approvals from the province. There is some potential risk to proceeding prior to ECA approvals, as the province could request changes. However, staff have been advised that that risk is low. Because these works are associated with a long-term care project, we're also hoping that the province will expedite the ECA approvals. It should be noted that none of the early works installed would be activated until ECA approvals have been received. So we've been working, and Kim mentioned this earlier, we've been working with West Gray staff, and West Gray staff have been excellent to deal with respect to this overall project. And we've also been working with their engineering consultant as well to ensure that the early works will not only support the future Rockwood Terrace long-term care home, but would also support future development, as I mentioned, on lands adjacent to the site, which includes lands owned by the county, so that 20 acres to the east of these lands, as well as other lands that the roads and services will run by. The cost for the works required to support the Rockwood Terrace redevelopment would be the responsibility of the county, whereas the cost for any additional works beyond what is required to support the Rockwood Terrace redevelopment would be the responsibility of West Gray. West Gray would likely be able to recoup some of these costs through development charges if they were update their DC background study, to account for these, as well as and so as the adjacent lands develop out, they could collect those DCs and recoup some of their costs that way. It should be noted that the scope of the early works may change prior to release of the tender if this task force supports the motion that's put before the task force, and well, of course, if council supports this motion that goes forward to the next council meeting. However, the intent would be to proceed at minimum with the early works required to support the Rockwood Terrace development, as well as any oversizing of the infrastructure. So if we're putting in a water main and we need to increase that water main to a certain size to support both Rockwood and future development, that should likely be included at minimum with the early works. So what is being considered as part of the early works? So one thing is for sure clearing and grading of the site and the access roads. So whatever's required to support the construction of the new Rockwood Terrace, as well as any clearing and grading of the access roads that are highlighted here on the map and are included in the figure 1 in the report, that would be part of the early works. In addition to grading on the Rockwood site and those access roads, grading would also occur, or what's proposed to occur, on the southeast corner of the Durham Curling Club lands. So just down here in this corner would be some additional grading that would be proposed as part of the early works. And grading at this corner would improve the overall design of the South Street East extension. So this is the South Street East extension here. This is what I will refer to as the Rock Street extension. And this here is what I'll refer to as the Kincardine Street South extension. So grading on this corner with the curling club will help just improve the overall design of the South Street East extension in this area. It'll help to reduce the need for things like retaining walls, as well as a manhole adjacent to the South Street East. So thereby reducing construction costs and future maintenance costs. West Grey and Grey County have met with representatives of the Durham Curling Club, and they are supportive of the proposed grading, subject to, of course, reviewing a final grading plan, which is currently being worked on by our county's engineering consultant. With respect to the roadworks, so access to the Rockwood Terrace redevelopment site would be via Rock Street. So right now, Rock Street ends just past the existing Rockwood Terrace lands. So we would be looking at extending Rock Street to connect down to where South Street East extension would go, and then connecting up to Kincardine Street South. So that loop of the road would be required in order to support the Rockwood Terrace lands. In terms of the and so those would be the responsibility of the county. In speaking with West Grey, one option they would like to consider in terms of just completing the overall road network in this area would be to continue to extend South Street East from Kincardine Street South all the way over to Albert Street. Right now, there is an existing road between Albert Street and Elgin Street South, but there would be proposed upgrades for that stretch of road. So it would be completion of this road to connect to Elgin, and then upgrading this section here. Is potentially part of the early works. Again, all subject to West Grey Council supporting having these at least included in the tender in principle. Those additional, so everything to the west of Kincardine Street South would be the responsibility of West Grey, and then anything again supporting or requiring to access the Rockwood Terrace lands would be the responsibility of the county. Staff did want to highlight, and Kim did mention this earlier, that there's right now staff of the existing Rockwood Terrace lands, there's parking that they often do on the side of Rock Street here. And once the construction starts, Rock Street will at some point become no longer accessible, right? So we're going to be extending water main, we're going to be extending sanitary sewage systems to connect to existing endpoints. And therefore, there's going to be a disruption of any parking along Rock Street. So as Kim mentioned, what we're currently looking at is this, in this red corner here, adding some additional parking spaces on a temporary basis as during construction. But as Kim noted, that can also be potentially repurposed or reused down the road, depending on if we the options considered for renovating the existing Rockwood Terrace lands to something else, some other use down the road. So we see this as works as not only supporting the construction from a temporary perspective, but also supporting future uses as well. Also along here, so there's a trucking business that's on this corner here. So it's a corner of Rock Street and Sadler Street East. And right now their access is off of Rock Street. And so again, during construction, we're going to try and minimize the amount of disruption as possible to that business. but we think there will be some sort of disruption. We're looking at potential options to try to maybe widen out Rock Street to provide a lane or a temporary access to be able to access this person's business. So that's one option we want to explore further with Wes Gray and the consultants. But at the moment, we just wanted to flag that for council, and we'll have some further discussions, obviously, with that trucking business, both with Wes Gray and Grey County, to see if how we can make sure we're minimizing disruption to that trucking business. In terms of, so that just gives you a sense of what we're proposing with respect to both the parking lots, temporary improvement, but also the road extensions. Any questions before I move on to some of the other servicing that's being considered as part of the early works?
Okay, so I'll just ask if there is a question, if you could please use the virtual hand, otherwise you won't come to the top of what I can view down the side. Although I think I did see, did I see Councillor McQueen's hand going up? If I did, go ahead.
Thank you. Just quickly, back on that, Randy, on that side road behind that trucking business, there's a bunch of stuff sort of parked in there, isn't there? I took a drive in there about a month and a half ago. Isn't there? There's like a bunch of stuff. It's sort of like, I don't know, people just sort of parked things and left it there. I don't know.
Yeah, there are some trailers that are parked at what we call the end of Rock Street at this bulb here. So again, we'll be working with that trucking company business as well as Wes Gray to see if that can be removed, obviously prior to any construction commencing. So we'll be having some further discussions with the trucking business around that, for sure.
It's probably out of sight, out of mind, and it's sort of been okay up until now, right? So
yeah, it's rarely used, the end of that bulb at the moment, and so yeah. But we'll for sure have further discussions with the company about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions from other members of the task force?
Yep, I have a question, Madam Chair.
Okay, sorry, I can't see who you are.
Oh, it's
Warden Milne.
That would be,
be
me. Yeah, thank you. Just wondering, South Street East extension and the intersection with Rock Street extension. Very unlikely that there, in the near future anything would go south or continue to go south on your Rock Street past south. But would it make sense to extend South Street East extension east, a lot of directions here, east of Rock Street, just to construct the intersection, not continue the road, more than maybe 50 feet, but just to construct that entire intersection now that we got it all tore up, to provide future access to the 20 acres to the east.
Yeah, good question. No doubt by having this Rock Street extending, it will provide at least access and road frontage to the lands directly on the other side of Rock Street. So at least a portion of the 20 acres. In terms of future access and extending this South Street East all the way out to, I think it's called Concession 1. That's a possibility for sure down the road. What we could at minimum look at is at that intersection, making sure that it's designed in a way that would easily allow for that extension to continue, whether it's to the east or, like you said, Warden Milne, to the south, at least designed in a way that those stubs can be put in or the connections can be made fairly easily at some point. My understanding is that part of the road extensions will also include sidewalks on the west side of Rock Street and the north side of South Street East as well. So I want to highlight that because the nice thing is we won't necessarily have curb and gutter on the east side or the south side. So that typically is where you see some where you have to cut out curbs and other things in order to allow for those extensions to occur. So we won't have that in the way down the road if we wanted to extend those roads further. So
okay, thank you.
No problem.
Excellent, thank you. Any other members of the task force? Yes, Councillor Mackey.
Oh, you're on mute, I think, Councillor
Yeah.
Mackey.
Make sure you're unmuted there.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I was a mute. So thank you for not watching my mouth just move. At what point should county council start having discussions around the remaining 20 acres? I guess I don't want to see too much work done without knowing what the remaining 20 acres is going to mean. I'd hate to see any duplication of work have to be done depending on what the remaining 20 acres. So for example, if that's going to be a plan of subdivision at some point, will the servicing that you're referencing, will it accommodate that sort of development up the road? And has that discussion been had with West Grey staff? I recognize that they're upsizing some of the water mains and stuff. So I'm just wondering, looking forward, when do we need to make a decision on what that remaining 20 acres should look like? Thanks.
Thank you.
Oops.
Oh dear. I think it's
Randy froze.
yes. Okay, that's inopportune, just as he's trying to speak.
Well, I'll jump in and he'll return in a moment.
Okay.
I think I'm
Oh,
sorry
there you
about
go.
that.
You
I'm
froze.
back.
Okay,
Yeah,
you're
for
back.
whatever reason, I all of a sudden lost connection. I apologize for that. With respect to that question, Councillor Mackey, in terms of, so we definitely have had those discussions with West Grey staff, and so the proposed early works, and I'll get into this in terms of the water.
Uh-oh.
Something's not happy there.
Okay. Do you want to carry
So
on?
what I can say is that we have had discussions, and you're all absolutely right that the upsizing of the water and wastewater infrastructure is meant to be sufficient for further development, kind of based on what our density is that what we're carrying at the present time. I think there's a lot of analysis that needs to go into what happens with that property. What's the best use? Where's the need? I think, part of some of these discussions are considerations, I should say, are financial ones. We know that we're going to hear about the new numbers for this on July the 6th. You heard that there's the potential for some significant investment in the existing building in order to repurpose that. And then, I think the same with this property. I think we need to do a deeper dive into it financially to see where's the potential. If you move that property now, if we undertook some development on the property and not on other parts, I think there's a lot of pieces here that we could take a look at. But from a staff perspective, we just haven't gone too far with that because we've been so focused on getting this project settled and moving forward. Randy, I said about the water and wastewater, so you go.
Great. No, it's great. Yeah. So, for sure, we want to explore all those options going forward. We want to make sure that, again, going back to the zoning and making sure that the zoning is as flexible as possible to be able to develop those lands in the future. So we'll be working with West Grey on that. We've already had some preliminary discussions with West Grey on that, and the oversizing of the pipes will definitely help support not just Rockwood Terrace, but the future development of those lands. And that's why we want to, for sure, work with West Grey. We don't want to redig up roads that we're putting down and then putting in bigger pipes later on. So that's exactly why we're proposing some of these early works to include some of those oversizing of pipes to support future development of those lands.
Okay, thank you very much. And next we'll go to Councillor McLean.
Well, we certainly want the most value added, if that's the idea. And maybe to Councillor Mackey, maybe it's at some point worth $19,140,000, just tongue in cheek on that one. But I like your idea. I like your thinking.
Okay, Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the task force? Okay, so process wise, we need to look at this efficiently right now because the idea is that we can realize some cost savings to this. So I'm just going to call up my agenda here. Okay, so it has been moved and seconded to receive, but also to authorize the issue of the tender and to hand it over to the warden and the clerk. So if there are no further questions, if I could ask if the screen could stop being shared so that I can see all of the hands. And with that, I will ask for the vote. All in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Madam Deputy Clerk. Okay, so that was the end of our reports. We do not have any correspondence pieces, nor other business was added to the agenda. So that allows us to move on to item 7, which is next meeting dates. When do we anticipate, perhaps I'll put this question to staff. When do we anticipate they'll need to be the next meeting?
For you, Madam Chair, you should have received a meeting invitation for July 6th at 2:30 p.m. So that will be this committee's next meeting date.
Okay, so we won't need to meet until then. All right, and if nobody else has said that they cannot attend, then I guess we've got quorum building, so that's good. All right, and with that, then we can put a motion that this task force meeting of June 15th does now adjourn at 4:05 p.m. May I please ask for a mover? Thank you, Councillor McQueen, seconded by Councillor Gregg. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? And that is carried, Madam Deputy Clerk. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to
Have a good
staff.
afternoon.
Thank you.
TTFN.
Bye-bye.